It seems then that there are certainly the long list of pledges that were made by the state when you guys took to the streets in 2024, and which largely the state hasn't met. Was this part of what was supposed to have been the concrete agenda to drive the course on Wednesday?
You know, Ayub, once an agenda is something we have to deliberate, then that means there was no agenda. That is the unfortunate reality. Or else the agenda was very vague and it was not, the messaging didn't really come out. Because the only messaging that tried to really come out was the agenda on the commemoration. Because we saw the families march to Central Police Station, they are meeting with the Inspector General, and they actually say they want to have, actually they did not even use the words protest. They actually say they want to have a march. It was basically a march to go and just lay their flowers. So it was not even a protest. So the truth is there was a problem in the messaging, there was a problem in the agenda setting of all this. Because the whole reason why, if we must be able to sit on this panel, Ayub, 48 hours later, and try to look at what was the agenda, then definitely there was no agenda. And then coming to now the issue of the promises of the president. Yes, I also largely agree that there were promises that were made by the president at that time, including the promise of justice to the families, which is one of the reasons that the young people in speech, when I listen to my brother Chris here, says is one of the major reasons why the young people are on the street. But now when you look at the issue of justice, sometimes for us to really get critical, Ayub, I have often advocated that as young people, we must also be strategic and we must be able to lay the problem at its doorstep. Because sometimes we lump every problem at one doorstep and then we lose the point. Because we are advocating for the rule of law and the constitution that we heavily gave ourselves as Kenyans in 2010. Now that constitution separated some powers. We gave ourselves independent institutions. So when we are able, and we are talking about the quest for justice for the families, we must be able to have the courage to call the judiciary to order. Because when we call for justice and say we still want it from the president, we are trying to take the country back to the times when the president was absolute and he had absolute power. But so why make the promise then? You know, the president is the head of the government, Ayub, and what the president needs to do is to be able to ensure that every institution is able to do its job. And what the president is able to do is now to ensure that, for instance, the people and the culprits are brought to book, like we saw in the case of Ojwang. But then when these cases go to court, now we are also now supposed to take the same level of accountability and the same energy to the judiciary and also ask for equal accountability. That's why I'm saying that if young people are able to be a bit more strategic, because our issues have people who actually deal with them. When we are dealing with matters of unemployment, for instance, Ayub, we gave ourselves the National Employment Authority. When we are on the streets, it adds more sense that we are able to also say, we want to call the National Employment Authority to order and say, in the last 3 years, what have you been able to do about the jobs of young people? So that once we are able to do that, I think our messaging would be better and would have tangibles. And I think that's where this protest lost it this time, because there was no tangibility in most of our matters. When we're talking about police brutality, which is a very heavy matter, you can imagine, Ayub, with the numbers that swelled in town. If, for instance, the young people are saying the Deputy Inspector General Langat must go, you can imagine if that would have been the agenda on Wednesday, then I suspect that it would have actually been achieved. If the agenda was to say that he must be able to resign, then that would have been able to be achieved. But that was not the agenda. We had a whole lot of issues lumped up together with no single direction. And that's why when we do that, political expediency kicks in. Now, politicians start taking advantage of this. Politicians start pushing us towards the direction that they want us to be. And that's why you're able to see some of the politicians who have, you said it before we even went on break, politicians who have actually spoken directly in support of some of these things, just because they are not in government today, they are now on the side of the young people. And some of us want to be gullible enough to actually trust them. Okay. To be blunt, you mean Rigathi Gachagua. But let me again come back to your point before I come to Jimmy and then come to Nyabul as well. Talking about the cause, for example, a fortnight ago, Kenyans went to the streets to demand for justice for Mwalimu Albert Ojwang.
calling for the resignation of the Deputy Inspector General, who has now stepped aside, Eliud Lagat. But it's during that peaceful demonstration that a mask vendor who was peaceful and unarmed was shot.
Unfortunate.
I mean, how then do we address the police brutality? And then the question of the politician, the president is a political animal who sought office and is now a state property, and who said all those who have been taken from their families have now been returned, and all the families that Citizen TV spoke to have not seen their missing kin. So where do we draw the line here on who holds the moral high ground?
I don't think it's more about who needs to hold the moral high ground. It's more about, can we just get the right thing done? Because, for instance, when you talk about the issue of the young man who was shot, the mask vendor, it's a totally unfortunate incident, because what makes it even worse about that case is the fact that it was not a conflict. They were not having a conflict. The mask, when you look at the clip, he doesn't even look like a gentleman who was part of the protest. He looks like a gentleman who was purely on his own business, and actually the gentleman is shot while walking away. Yeah, and there is no level of explanation that can actually be able to rescue that fact and say that you can be able to find some tangible reason why that happened. That was an extremely unfortunate situation. And the same situation actually happened 2 days ago, where again you're talking about 16 lives that were lost. So both of those instances, Ayub, are extremely unfortunate. Now what we are supposed to be doing is calling everyone to order and ensuring that all of us, no one says, it's not about a competition on who holds a higher moral ground. Yeah. It should be, let us just get the right thing done. Okay. This policeman who has been able to shoot that gentleman, what happened to Ojwang, the 16 deaths that we were able to have, including the people who actually beat up the police, the people who were able to get into police stations and take guns, the people who were able to burn down police stations. The agenda of young people was not to burn down police stations. The agenda was not to get police uniform. The agenda was not to get into supermarkets in town and ban the supermarkets and steal. Because what happens is, the way I told you in the beginning, today we have more young people who are now jobless, courtesy of 48 hours ago. And yet we are the same country that is struggling to say we have a crisis on youth unemployment.
Thank you.
So we cannot be able to be having our cake and eating it at the same time.
Yes, Jimmy.
Yes.